At this point, I don't care because I'm not going to read it. I know that we all have a series that we did not finish. It's not just me. Probably more than one series. You read the first book because somebody suggested it. All the hype on social media. You were just looking for a new series and you found one highly rated. There's lots of reasons to start a series, and there's a lot of reasons to never finish one. I have 6 different series that I'm talking about that I started, and for various reasons I just did not care to finish. And it's always okay to put down a book and say, this is not for me, this series is not for me. The thing that I think matters when you decide not to finish something like that is that we are still kind to the people who do love the series we decided not to read. There will be spoilers for the books I'm talking about because the spoilers some of the time are why I decided not to keep reading. I'm just gonna go ahead and start with A Court of Thorns and Roses. I did read the first one. I was not going to. I am the type of person that if something has a lot of hype, I will rebel against it. And so I was partly choosing not to read it because it seemed like everybody was reading it. I also don't really read in the romantasy genre. I've read a couple. I wasn't sure it sounded like my type of thing. And then I found it used for $1 and I thought, you know what? Why not? Why not at least try it? Then instead of just saying, I don't want to read it, I can have actual reasons why I either didn't like it or discover a new series that I will like and have more books to read. And I will say that A Court of Thorns and Roses is not bad. I have heard from the fans who have read the whole series that it improves and gets better after the first book. Okay, I've read series like that. Cool. But I would need to like the first one enough to give the next ones a chance or to care enough. And at the end of the book, I didn't care enough to keep going. One of my main issues with A Court of Thorns and Roses, I'll just say ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses, ACOTAR. One of the main things that I did not enjoy about ACOTAR, that sounds weird, A Court, Thorns and Roses. Why does it have such a long name? There is this thing called show, don't tell. It's a guideline, not an actual rule, but I felt like, at least in the first book, because I didn't read the rest, Sarah J. Maas did a lot more telling than showing. It felt like far too often it would just tell me how she was feeling instead of showing her interacting with the characters around her to show me how she was feeling. And this is a book that's supposed to be a romance, and it didn't feel very romantic. I didn't get any spark between Feyre and Tamlin. There was a lot more spark between Feyre and Rysand, if that's how you say it, Rysand. But I didn't like Rysand in that book. And the thing that bugged me the most was we spend the whole first half of the book on this supposed romance between Feyre and Tamlin, 2 main characters, and then for the second half of the book, it just completely switches to this other guy, and her time spent with the other guy is not even romantic. She's a prisoner, she's trying really hard to rescue the first guy from this evil fairy queen, whatever. It's been a while since I read it. And so she is going through almost torture, maybe torture in some ways, trying to rescue Tamlin because they love each other and they want to be together. The book ends with them together. And then by then I was like, I'm not going to finish this. I don't care enough. This didn't draw me in, pull me in. So I looked up just kind of the plot summary of the following books. And spoilers, she doesn't end up with Tamlin. Spent all this time trying to get to him, Feyre and Tamlin. But no, she's going to be with this other guy who was doing stuff to her that was not kind, but apparently it was because of reasons, and I don't know, seemed a little toxic. I don't care much for love triangles, and if there's gonna be a romance, it needs to feel like there's something going on between the characters. You know who my favorite character was in that book? Tamlin's friend, Lucian or Lucius or something like that. So anyway, too much telling instead of showing. Romance I didn't care about in a romance-themed book. It's not for me, and that's okay. The other one that I read, the first book, and I don't plan on finishing, is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. That is one of his young adult sci-fi series. I may or may not have read it. I don't know. The inciting incident for me to try the series was the subscription Year of Sanderson swag box. There was a Skyward themed one, and I didn't want to be completely lost and not know anything that I was opening, so I decided to at least read the first Skyward book, which I did feel like was worth it for the opening the box because I knew what the things in the box were. I knew what a Doomslug was, an M-Bot. And it was interesting enough that I would recommend it to a young adult who likes science fiction. But for me, I felt like, I don't know, I felt like I got a full story arc in the first book. So if a series is done well, there's one big overarching story through the series, but each book has its own little arc so that you feel like you got a whole story in one book. I felt like the arc in the first book was enough, and I didn't dislike it. I didn't think it was bad. I just don't feel like I need to know what happens in the rest. No judgment. I really do like Sanderson's adult fantasy. I don't think, especially with Sanderson, to be a true fan, you have to read everything that author writes. But for an author like Sanderson, he has so many books. It would be such a time commitment to read everything. You just don't have to. It's okay to just read the ones you like. Okay, next is one that I was more upset. I don't know if I'd say upset. Disappointed. I made kind of a rant review on Hyperion by Dan Simmons. I did not enjoy that one. I did not read the full book. That was a DNF from me. It felt, well, if you really want to know how I felt, you can go watch my review. It was so disconnected with each character telling their own story. The ending of the first little story where a character is telling their backstory, it was good and it was well done. It wasn't about the person telling the story, it was about somebody else. And then that section of the book ended in kind of a creepy, I don't know, I didn't like it. I didn't like the feeling it gave me after I read it, but I decided to give the book a chance and I read the next character's backstory, and that one was just weird and I didn't like it at all. And at that point, there were like 3 other characters that were going to give their story and then what the characters did by the end of the book, and I was like, if I'm not enjoying this, if I'm not happy, and if it's just disgusting me and making me mad, why continue? Why bother? Why waste my time? So I did not even finish it, nor will I read any of the other Hyperion books. The 4th series that I will not be continuing is the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I also have a review on that one. I did finish the whole first book. I wanted to give it more of a chance. People speak so highly of this series. And also it wasn't bad. It's not a bad book, but it did not draw me in. I did not care about the characters. I felt like the plot was confusing. I don't know. There were good things about it. That's another one where after I finished the first one, I wanted to know about the rest. It appears that when you go onto the other books, it's not necessarily the same cast of characters. It'll be a different cast of characters at the same time that the first book was going on. I do like a big epic fantasy, but Malazan didn't make me care enough in the first book, and I think that's really important for the first book of a series. That might be the biggest trend in all of these on why I'm not continuing these series. The first book has to be good enough and has to make you care enough to want to read the rest. That's by Steven Erikson, by the way. I hope I'm remembering to say the author of all of these. I just remembered another one. I'll save that one for last. It's not in my notes. Okay, onward to the Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. People speak so highly of this one. I tried the first book. It was probably a very bad time for me to try it because my reason for putting it down wasn't that I thought it was a bad book. I did think it was a little confusing. I feel like I remember the prose being a little odd. I DNF'd it shortly into it. And the reason I DNF'd so shortly into it, and the reason I don't remember much about what I read, was because I was pregnant with my second child, and the child loss at the beginning was far too triggering for me. So I will not give an opinion on that series or that author on her writing or her stories because I don't have one. I didn't read far enough in to say whether I think this would be a good story, but just not for me. I couldn't get past that first part. It is possible that I could go back and read them and enjoy them. I have heard nothing but praise for these books. But at the time that I read them, it was not a good time for me. All the hormones. Oh boy. And so that is a series that I may try again at some point. But right now, at this point in my life, there's so many other things to read that it's not a priority. This one is almost not fair because everyone else who's read the first book in the series is in the same boat as me. That is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. The rest of the series is just not written. There's been a lot of jokes. There's been a lot of sarcasm. There's also more recently been a lot of empathy for Patrick Rothfuss. I read the first one. I did not read the second one, partly because I heard there wasn't a third one yet, and partly because I felt like it was a big book of nothing. One of those books where, even though a lot of things happen in the book, you finish the book going, what was the point of that? Why did I just read all that? Did the conclusion matter? One of the best things I hear other people say about The Name of the Wind is that they love Patrick's. They like his prose. His prose is beautifully written. And I liked the story elements. I liked the things that Quoth did in the book, but it just kind of felt pointless. I don't know. Like, what was he even working towards? Why was he going to magic school? What was he supposed to accomplish? It's also been a while since I read it, so details are a little fuzzy. I have heard people call Quoth a Mary Sue, which I feel like is pretty accurate. He's too strong, too overpowered, too good, too talented, too smart. He needs to fail more often. If the third book ever comes out, I might give it another chance, but I have to know there's gonna be a point. Oh yeah, and it's basically him bragging the whole time because he's the one narrating it later. He's like, listen to how awesome I am and all the cool things I did. Okay, last one, because I just thought of it as I was filming a long, long time ago, over 10 years ago. I don't even know how old I was, my early 20s. I read the first Game of Thrones book. That was one that had a lot of hype at the time. That was the epic fantasy that everyone was reading. And I thought, okay, I'll try it out. I checked it out from the library, and because it was so long ago, I don't remember much of my impressions. I felt like it was a well-written book, but for me, I am not the type of reader who needs or wants a bunch of sex and violence. That's not what I'm into fantasy for. And my feelings after reading that one was that that was a lot of the point of the story. That in some ways, the adult content was as important or more important than the characters and the plot of the book. So that wasn't one where I felt like it fizzled out. I didn't feel like what was the point of that. It wasn't one where I felt like I didn't care about the characters enough. I just didn't feel like I needed that much adult content and I didn't need to keep filling my brain with it. That's another series. Why do I do this? It's because I'm curious. I read plot summaries for the further books and I was like, oh man, they're right. This is the series where everybody dies. The jokes are correct. And it seemed like there was just a lot of fighting and it didn't matter who won because in the next book there'd just be more fighting and I don't know. Same thing with this guy. When are we getting the last book? At this point, I don't care because I'm not gonna read it. I felt like this was a really negative video. The next one of these I do, I think will be the series that I am currently reading that I do plan on finishing. That sounds a lot more positive. It'll probably get less views, but now I feel like making a positive video. I hope to see you back here for that one and more videos. Bye.